All right. Hey, everyone. Super excited to join you this morning, and super excited about the topic as well. And actually, it's been probably closer to 18 years now since I've been in cybersecurity. I was thinking back about all these different environments that I've had over my career to try to defend and protect, as well as also to try to hack and penetration test against those environments. And several years ago, I was lamenting with a good friend of mine about how easy it was to actually penetrate the defenses of nearly every environment that I was testing at the time. And I was asking him, how on earth were we ever going to be able to, in our field and having the responsibilities we do, ever get a full night's sleep again? Would we ever have a fighting chance? And then I started asking questions like, do we need more regulation? Do we need, better programs? And his response is like both haunted me and motivated me ever since. Trent, you can have all the regulatory controls and program controls in the world in place, but there's always going to be someone out there with more motivation than you, more resources than you, and more time than you. Good luck with that. And so, with that in mind, I've developed kind of an important tactic since that afternoon with my good friend. And if we're ever going to have a fighting chance, right, as an industry, we're going to have to get smart, and we're going to have to get street smart. So what I mean by street smart is, are we awake really to the environment that we're operating in? Are we awake to the fact that we're walking down this dark alley with maybe a detachable backpack, a loose fitting Rolex, maybe some Docker street kicks on, and not really aware of what's going on around us? Being street smart means that we're kind of lowering that chance of becoming a victim. And if we do happen to become a victim, that we're both escaping with our life and our possessions. Speaking of being awake and kind of what's happening around us, I don't know if any of you have seen something like this before, but if you have a building or a data center that's really super airtight and security's everywhere, and maybe you're a penetration testing firm and you don't want to have to pay for somebody to take a flight out to the office to try to pop it, you could just build a little disposable contraption like this that actually goes in the bottom of a package. And then you ship it to the location that you want to test, and you let the authorized UPS guy kind of drop it off inside that building for you. And once inside the building, it starts to scan and attack the local wireless networks, not possible to access outside the building. This is the kind of the best part is that once it's collected all the information uh, and you throw away the package, like it is now sitting in the dumpster, like it's now connecting out actually to through a cell tower out to a command and control and dumping all the information that it collected from inside your data center and providing that back to the attacker. And this is actually a term that's kind of known now as worshipping. We're starting to see a little bit more of this kind of testing. Here's another one. I don't know if you guys have seen these before, but this particular cable it kind of looks like a charging cable, and in fact it does charge, but it does a whole lot more than that. And when it's plugged into an actual laptop, it looks like a keyboard to the operating system, and then that little remote control actually executes some software that's built into the head of that USB adapter there, and it actually sends a beacon back to the command and control and provides system level access then to the attacker and to the device itself. And can you imagine, like, I was thinking about this scenario, like your executive sitting there in the Starbucks, right? He goes up to grab his coffee from the counter, and when he gets back, he doesn't even realize that the charging cable has been exchanged for this one, for a USB Ninja cable. They log into their laptop, and the attacker is just sitting a couple tables away with his little remote, and then executes that little beacon, and all of a sudden now there is a backdoor system level access to your executive's laptop. And those kinds of things are happening and exist all over. And how awake are we, right, to these kinds of simple attacks, and how aware are our executives or our MLTs, or our most likely targets, aware of these sorts of things around them? And this goes to show, like, how aware and awake are we, like, to Google, and, like, do we know what kind of personal information or or publicly available company information out there on Google. There was a time that Google hacking was very popular, and there were lots of articles about it. There was lots of hype about it, but I think we've kind of forgotten about how much rich information there is there, and it's becoming a little bit of a lost art in a way. Um, I just to give you some idea, I don't want to spend a bunch of time on this, but there are some great Google Dork hacking databases that are out there. You can look those up, but just doing some simple searches with some very specific syntax will give you a lot of information about your company. For example, I asked my team, like, what are some of the greatest like Google Dorks that you're aware of? And so that's why you see the Spice Girls one there. They were just kind of looking at, hey, what, can we find out, what movies are out there and what devices, when you see an index of something, that means that somebody's, Google's actually indexed somebody's operating system that they accidentally exposed to the internet. And sure enough, there was a Spice Girls movie, right, that was part of that. Or you might look for file type doc. Excel spreadsheets are always very interesting. But look for your company, like spend a little bit of time looking at your domains. And by the way, it just doesn't take a lot of like skill to do this. Like you can be really scrappy, and that's one of the reasons I really like Google, is because you can actually find out a lot about your company and be really scrappy. And so that gives you a little bit more information about that street that you're walking down, right? And becoming a little bit more street smart as we move forward in the future. So we're all pretty familiar with a great report called the Cost of a Breach report that the Ponemon Institute and IBM put out each year. But you may not be familiar with another report that I actually personally love called the Cyber Resilient Organization Report. And there's some really, really great statistics in there. If you look at the upper left-hand box there, 57% of all compromised companies out there can expect to have another incident within 2 years of that compromise. That's a gigantic number. I think partly because attackers and others see that corporation or that entity as soft, and so once they've already popped them once, they're going to go after them again until they get things right. So they definitely see multiple compromises in a row there. That's 57%. Now, just to give you a little bit of context around the report, like there are nearly 3,000 companies that responded to the survey that made up the data in this report. And they weren't like super giant complex organizations or really small organizations. It's a good representation, I think, of where most organizations are as it relates to their cybersecurity program. So if you've had a compromise, you can probably expect to have another pretty significant compromise within 2 years. If you go down to the lower left-hand corner of that box, only about 17% of those reporting in that survey had any kind of board level reporting. That's crazy to me, and also super scary. That board needs to know what's going on with cybersecurity and cybersecurity program, and what your posture is, so that they can help their executive staff and the business make good decisions about where to invest in the future. So that's also a really scary statistic to me. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, kind of in a similar vein as that one, only 24% have any kind of C-level cybersecurity buy-in. Also really terrifying. If you look across all those companies, you're talking about 3/4 not having any C-level cybersecurity buy-in. My guess is that that's really low because we're doing a terrible job at communicating the street that we're all traveling down, and they have no idea how to be street smart as they travel down that road. And then if you look at the big kind of blue-green box there, probably the most terrifying number of all, right, is this 23%. Only 23% of us have any kind of an IR plan that we're practicing and applying consistently across our organization. That's terrible. Like, we're living in a day and age where we are going to have incidents, where we are going to have times when we're walking down that street and somebody's trying to rip that backpack off our back. Like, it's gonna happen, and yet somehow we're not practicing for it. We're not applying it consistently across our organization. So how street smart are you? How street smart is your team? How street smart is your business? What if you are a victim? And I can promise you that you will be walking down that alley someday. Look, we all have regulation. We all have PCI compliance that we have to comply with. We all have, the GDPR regulation that we're trying to implement. We all have other certifications like ISO 27001 or maybe a SOC 2 attestation that we have to keep up with. Like, we all need those kinds of programs, no question. But we can't get so caught up in compliance that no one's looking out at the street that we're walking down. No compliance, is going to save us from, from the USB Ninja cable or our executive like walking away from their laptop for a second, right? Like, no one is going to save us from, no compliance program is going to save us from, hey, look, somebody accidentally exposed some Excel spreadsheet about our financial status on Google. And so if we can only do two things to help our business or our team be street smart, and it doesn't matter if you're C-suite or an individual contributor, it's triaging risk and it's rolling dice. And you'll notice that it's not 18 control domains or 300 pages of security questionnaires. It's just two scrappy ways that we can make sure that our team is awake to the environment that we're operating in. So the first thing to do is to triage risk. What resources do we have to protect ourselves? Maybe we can use the backpack on our back to help us defend ourselves. Maybe I started Taekwondo last week and I learned some new skill that I can use, that I'm now proficient in. In other words, take a quick, scrappy inventory of the capabilities and proficiencies that you and your team have. And there really is no wrong way to do it. We just have to do it. One of the things that I love to use to help me assess risk and to triage risk in just a really scrappy way is to use a spider chart. A spider chart is a quick way to really look at the entire landscape and to ascertain your risk with just really one view and not lots of information. I think they're a wonderful way, spider charts are, to digest a ton of information very quickly and very visually. At Pluralsight, we call our spider chart the Pluralsight Security Index. And I use this with my C-suite, my board, and they love it. It gives us a quick way to talk about where we're proficient and where we need to triage and where we might need to skill up or advance on certain legs. It's also a wonderful means of generating a scrappy risk score. You'll notice that on that left-hand leg around product there, that there are different numbers. If you look, for example, at password strength, maybe we've got all of the password complexity controls in place. We're following NIST 863. We're doing everything we need to do, but maybe we need a different hashing algorithm on the back end. You'll notice that there's a 10 on that. So maybe we can improve our password hashing practices on the back end. And so we have about 10% risk left. Or maybe as you move up an MFA, maybe you have one factor for MFA, and maybe you want to implement other factors of authentication. So maybe you have about 20% left of risk, and you can kind of work your way up each of these legs and just put in a number as far as the amount of risk that you have left. Now, it would mean that you would probably need to interview the teams that are responsible for these pieces, but just get a scrappy gut feel for the type of risk that you have left. Then you just take a leg average for that leg and all the other legs that you're working on, and then you can take an average of that and you have a chart average of 41. So now the cool thing is that you can actually start to create some things like this for your executive team and for your staff. Now, for me, and I try to put myself in their shoes, like, we can put a bunch of numbers in front of them, but let's put a number between 0 and 100, with 100 meaning the house is on fire, it's probably burned to the ground, 0 meaning, hey, there's absolutely zero risk, right, of anything happening, which isn't really practical, right? And we're going to probably find some operating ideal state somewhere in there that we're comfortable with as a business running at. But start to talk in terms of, hey, our risk score is about 41 overall, and we'd like to drop it to 37. Now you can have some really great discussions with your executive team on what kind of investment would that take? Is there a better place in our program to maybe invest where we get bigger bang for buck? But the nice thing is now you have scores that your executive team and your board can actually wrap their head around. And the cool thing is you can actually start to kind of track these things over time now. And you can see where you might have had an increase, and great discussions can arise from that. Why did it increase? Oh, we found the new Windows vulnerability around the crypto libraries, which we just saw. And now your executive staff can say, great, well, what is that taking? What are you doing? Do you need additional help and support from us to address that risk? Or maybe they decide to accept that risk, but it's a business level discussion and decision at that point. So you've heard it before. It's not if, it's when. Eventually, while you're walking down this alley, you will become a victim. And what are you going to do? I'm going to suggest trying to figure out, I'm going to try and suggest that trying to figure that out while you're walking down that alley is the absolute wrong time to do that. The second street smart action that you can take is to practice now and practice with rolling dice. So many of you probably have very complex incident response plans. This is a visual of essentially the Pluralsight incident response plan. There is a 50-page document that goes behind all of this with all of the detail that, of course, our auditors and others need to validate that we have a good plan. But if you were to look at it visually, it's very complex, as you see here. And probably what you need if you're going to be street smart is something a little closer to this. It's a lot more simple for your team and others to understand who's going to do what and who they're going to communicate with. Then the cool thing is you can start to create some scenarios. Here's just a scenario that I used with my executive team probably about a year ago now. And it was kind of fun. I literally sat around the table with my CMO, my CEO, my CIO, my CFO, my CXO, and others. And we literally sat there with this example, and we just put this up on the screen. A 3-letter agency shows up at headquarters because the company was involved in a crime. It seems like systems associated with the business and hosted in a cloud environment were used in a ransomware attack on a local municipality. The security team has investigated, and a marketing employee used a corporate email to sign up for a personal cloud service account that had been compromised. So that was the scenario. So then the cool thing is you can actually start to, well, here's just just to back up for a second. Here's the setup. So that was the scenario, and then here's the setup with the dice. So you take a pair of dice, and you have the executive team now roll on some questions, which I'll show you in a second. But as they roll, a 1 to 6 means that whatever action you're rolling around is a fail, and a 7 to a 12 is succeed. And then you have modifiers, and you might give them a +3 modifier if there's a documented process around how to do something, or a +2 modifier if someone is trained, and then a plus or minus 6 modifier at your discretion because you're kind of quote unquote the dungeon master, right? As you kind of work the scenario and as you play this thing out and roll dice. And the reason why you might want to have the plus or 6 modifier is because you might feel like as the security leader that you need to really dive in on some particular piece of your incident response plan. But having this set up and making sure the team understands the rules is also important as you roll dice. So then you can start to have some discussions around some very specific questions. So in that particular scenario, we asked the question, were members of the command decision team, which is our executive team, were they able to be contacted by the incident response team? In other words, that security team and maybe the IT team that were trying to figure out what was going on with that cloud account. So then I literally would have, for example, my chief HR officer actually roll dice around were members of the CD team able to be contacted. And so they might roll the dice, and depending on how they rolled, you might move forward, right, in your discussion. Another question that we asked was the IRT able to gain control over that AWS account? And so we would roll dice around that. And then another question, did the CDT require outside technical assistance, and were they available? And then we'd roll dice around that. But you can make up whatever, of course, whatever discussion questions you want. But the idea is you're going to want to have some of this ready, and you're going to want to advance the storyline for your executive team, maybe your board, or even if it's a technical team that they're doing these tabletop exercises with. but use dice to make it kind of fun for them and for you as you guys move forward. Because honestly, as you're going through an incident, we all know that it really is a lot about just rolling the dice on whether or not things will work or not. But we have to practice to kind of know. But the whole point of doing these tabletop exercises and rolling the dice is to identify upgrades, places where you can improve. Do we need to establish a relationship with outside services before we need them? Which ones? And great discussion ensued from that. In fact, we found ourselves getting retainers with firms to help us if we needed help remediating or eradicating things inside our environment. Like maybe we just simply didn't have the resources to do it. So we went out and got a retainer with a firm that we could have and call on a moment's notice to come help us. Maybe you need outside legal counsel, and so you might need a retainer there, and to have an established relationship with a firm there to help you with legal questions. And these are kinds of things that you can ask your board and your executive team as well. And what's the business risk of employees using corporate intellectual property? So in this particular scenario, a marketing employee used our domain to sign up for a cloud service account, and actually it was compromised, at least in our scenario. So what's the impact of them using intellectual property to do that? And then the third question, which was kind of a technical one that I could pose to my CIO or to my IT team, was how can we even know when corporate email accounts are being used to sign up for those kinds of services? And how and is that even against policy, right? So now we had our legal team involved, and our GC could weigh in on whether or not that was even a problem. But some cool things, a cool thing that came out of that was just from a technical standpoint, we could actually look for welcome emails. So in the case of Amazon Web Services, like if somebody was using a Pluralsight domain, we could actually see that welcome email come through our email system, and we could start to look for those. And we could start to question our employees on why they needed those services and why they couldn't just use accounts that we maybe already had set up. So some really scrappy things kind of come out of these discussions, and it really helps our executive team and others start to become street smart about what's going on around them. So why even triage or roll the dice? You'll notice that my approach consists of two tools, right? The spider chart, which kind of helps us identify where we are currently as a program, and then maybe where we might need to go as a program as we need to advance out on one of those legs. And it gives, again, a really quick, easy, scrappy way for our executive team and for you to just know kind of where you are. And the second approach is, of course, to use tabletop exercises around incident response. Get those dice in there and roll the dice, because it will be a roll of the dice when you are actually in the middle of an incident itself. Using these tools will help you be scrappy and effective with the few people and the dollars and the hours that you get to actually handle your cybersecurity program. So what can you do? The whole point of all of this, right, is to transform and to skill up. If your executive team or your technical teams need help, or you need help coming up with ideas for your incident response plan, like you got to skill up on that. You got to look. And trust me, most security teams are never going to be able to scale. You're going to have to push that accountability much further than the cybersecurity team. Like you're going to have to push it to the front desk people. Maybe even to your data people or your developers themselves. Push this incident response or whatever point or knee joint you're trying to push out to on your spider chart. Push that out, that accountability out, and expand your people, your dollars, and that accountability to every role within your organization. And what I like to call cross-skilling. They have a day job, but they should all be cross-skilled in information security and cybersecurity. So in summary, just some key takeaways. So triage risk and develop a street smart score. That score is going to be so powerful for you. Yeah, you can put a lot of rigor. You can put a lot of risk score metrics, a lot of thought behind that. But this day and age, and trust me, you'll have to have that for these programs. But this day and age, you also need that scrappy street smart score that you got in the back of your head that maybe you're providing your executive team and your board that they can easily wrap their heads around. Second, you're going to want to create IR scenarios, and you're going to want to roll the dice. you're going to want to spend time actually playing some of the scenarios out with your team so that they can get skilled up on what to do in the case of an incident. And then you're going to want to identify those gaps and those upgrades and spend some time like with your executive team, helping them realize that these are business level decisions and risks, and so they're on the seat, on the hook for that to make those decisions. And then finally, be super scrappy. Google dork, right? Like that lost art of Google dorking. Like spend some time just looking around, just making sure that something isn't out there that we're not aware of. And again, it doesn't take a ton of skill to do that. Like we just have to be scrappy and aware of the street that we're walking down. And also be scrappy with your technical teams. You don't have to have really expensive tools and solutions. Look at your email system for welcome emails. Like let the team be scrappy. Again, compliance was never meant to be security. Security was one of those things that really, as we're walking down that street, we've got to just be on our toes about what's going on around us, and hopefully these couple of things will help you do that.
Thanks so much, Trent. At this time, we have a couple of questions that have come in, and we'd love for you to take a crack at them. The first one, how do you quantify a risk on a library that you have identified as a potential risk?
Yeah, so yeah, we all know, right? Especially third-party libraries, right? That's really tough. And we all, of course, don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. And so, third-party libraries are a part of probably every one of our businesses, whether we want them to be or not. So quantifying a risk there, it's kind of like walking down the street and realizing that all of a sudden you've got somebody following you down the street, right? How do you quantify that risk? Well, you might move that backpack to the front of in front of you so you can kind of hold on to it, or maybe you don't walk down that street alone. And so you're going to have to quantify that with just kind of a scrappy, hey, look, like I feel pretty safe because I'm not alone, or I feel pretty safe because that backpack's in front of me. Maybe that's 40 or 50%, right, safe. It's going to be hard, but you're going to have to be scrappy, and that's part of being street smart.
Awesome. Got another one just came in. Do you check every software library released by a vendor before you incorporate it into your product or systems?
Yeah, so here at Pluralsight, we do. We actually use multiple tools to help us look at those third-party libraries. If just as kind of a shout out to GitHub, like if you use them, like they actually have some built-in capabilities, so you can actually look for vulnerabilities in any kind of open source libraries that exist out there in GitHub now.
Awesome. The Pluralsight Security Index that you referenced, is that available for everyone?
Yeah, so it actually is. I actually did create that for a couple of speaking presentations, and so that is available to anyone. And maybe, hopefully we'll be sending that out to those that have attended this webinar. And happy to get that to you. But it may not work for everyone. Every single knee joint there, so you'll have to customize it, of course, for your business and for your company. And certainly you're going to have to like create your own web around that chart for how you're where you're proficient or where you want to advance out on that spider chart.
Awesome. Okay, I think we have one more question. Who is typically part of the tabletop exercise that when you do an incident response training?
Yeah, I love that question. There are so here at Pluralsight, at least, like we have two different tabletop exercises that we host every 6 months. One is a technical tabletop exercise that includes our IT team and our product development teams, our ops, and that. So it's really just the technical folks, and we work through eradication, containment, those kinds of things. And then separately, we actually hold one with our executive staff as well, so that we can work through notifications to our board, to the public, and then of course how they might want to respond to those sorts of things. And so we actually have two, and the executive one includes our entire executive staff and sometimes our board, because they're going to want to be clued in on what's happening from a response perspective as well.
Awesome. Great answer. Now, thank you so much for taking the time and talking about this today. I know it's so important. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to maybe leave one final takeaway with the audience here.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing, like, I know I'm probably repeating what I said, but compliance was never meant to be security. Like, we have to be street smart, based on the business that we have, the data that we're handling, processing, storing. We've got to look at that and like take a step back from any compliance or program and just ask ourselves, like, where's the risk, and then start to develop a program around that. And of course, you want to triage that, but spend a little bit of time there. You may even put a scenario for your executive or technical teams around that very thing, but you got to be scrappy with it. And if you're scrappy with it, those things can really develop into like really strong parts of your program as well. But it's all about being street smart.